Good evening, everyone. It's good to see all of you here this evening. Those of you who are online with us this evening, you're welcome as well, and we're glad that you're with us. So this evening, I thought I wanted to speak to you about a subject that I know I've touched on it in the past, but I want to talk about it a little bit more this evening and maybe a little bit more depth. You know, we've talked a lot about the coronavirus being a pandemic that has been all around the world. What I want to talk to you about is an epidemic, in that it's an epidemic of the absence of integrity that sweeps across our land. There's a lot of it out there, and so I thought I might touch on it and just talk to you a little bit about it. You know, there's no such thing as, being halfway when it comes to integrity. It's almost like saying that you're kind of married. You're either married or you're not married, and so there's not a whole lot of in between when it comes down to that subject. Unfortunately, as we look around us, we see that there is a lot of different things that are going on where integrity seems to lapse. If you were to go back just in history, you could see a lot of that. For instance, the date was January the 28th, 1986. The cold morning in Cape Canaveral in Florida. It's the scheduled launch of the spaceship Challenger, or the Challenger space shuttle. Unbeknownst by those who were watching it on TV there was a war of words that were going on between two factions of people. One were the executives. They insisted that the launch take place on this date. On the other side were cautious engineers who said, you know what, there's something that doesn't feel quite right about this launch. We're not sure about this launch. But the executives pushed on it, and the result is that the executive won. And so they launched the Challenger space shuttle. And 70 minutes into the flight, 7 people died. For the next hour, debris from the shuttle would rain down upon the Atlantic. So the question was asked, well, what happened there? What went wrong? Well, there was a breakdown in integrity. Not just the integrity of the ship itself, not just the integrity of the fuel seal, but the integrity of those who had control over the launch of the shuttle itself and the decision that was made. They ignored the danger and the warning signs and launched. Less dramatic, however, is more widespread slaughter of thousands of people on our highways every year. Every year, almost 10,000 people are killed by those who are unimpaired or those who are drunk drivers. 10,000 people. There seems to be, in that area there, just a breakdown of integrity. When you think about that and you compare it to, say, the gun law debates that are going on today, no doubt there's a lot of that happening around us, people who are being killed by guns, but I got to thinking about that and thinking about, well, what about all these thousands of people who are being killed on the roads? Why doesn't a politician or someone speak out against the abuse of alcohol and the sale of alcohol that is so freely given? Maybe there is a lack of integrity when it comes down to the two areas. I'm not saying that one should outweigh the other, but maybe there should be a discussion about the integrity of both of those as they relate to our society. Or what about the spreading of diseases? What about the acquired immune deficiency syndrome? There was a time when we heard a lot about that. You seldom ever hear about AIDS anymore. At one time, it was front page news. At one time, it was on the TV news almost every night. And for those who did, internet in that day, it was even talked about. But not much is really talked about this moral lapse of integrity when it comes down to casual sex of our day. The moral lapse that is there is, without a doubt, a blight on our nation. I was looking at this and discovered that there are over 37,968 HIV diagnoses in the United States, and that statistic went back to 2018. Of those 37,000 plus almost 38,000, the Surgeon General said that 15,807 people died of that disease. But it doesn't fit the narrative. It doesn't fit the narrative of free sex or casual sex or even the LGBTQ movement that is there. And so it's not talked a lot about. As I was reading down through the diagnosis that is in the United States, it said that it was dependent on several areas. 69% among gay, bisexual, and other men who have sex with men. 24% were among heterosexuals. 7% were among people who injected drugs. And so the question that I would have is, okay, so where's the integrity? In fact, what is the definition of integrity? When you think about just the word itself, what is its definition? Well, the word really has a root meaning. It means to be whole or to be sound or to be unimpaired or to be entire. If you were to talk about it in the physical sense of it and you think about a large ocean liner that's going across the seas, then there are going to be quality assurance inspectors who are going to do an integrity inspection of the ship itself. They will check whether the welds are solid. They're going to look for corrosion and rust. They're going to make sure that the beams are where they're supposed to be. They're going to look for the soundness of that ship before they allow it to cross the seas. When you talk about integrity in terms of who we are and what we are, then integrity has to do with the absence of double standards or deceit or hypocrisy. If you were to put it in words that are synonymous, it says that a person is trustworthy, that a person is honest, that a person is a person of their word, that they are accountable, that they are the kind of person that is genuine and authentic in every area of their life. David, as a person, was a person of great integrity. He had some moral lapses in his life that I'll talk about just briefly in a few moments. But when under persecution, David used this word in Psalm 7 and verse 8. He says, "Vindicate me, O Lord, according to my integrity." Or when he was tempted, he said, "Guard my soul and deliver me. Do not let me be ashamed, for I take refuge in thee. Let integrity and uprightness preserve me, for I wait for thee." When he was chosen by God, he was chosen because of his integrity. God also chose David, his servant, and took him from the sheepfolds, from the care of the ewes with suckling lambs he brought him, to shepherd Jacob his people and Israel his inheritance. So he shepherded them according to the integrity of his heart and guided them with skillful hands. Psalm 78, verses 70 through 72. As he was elevated from the fields as a shepherd boy, he came into being the king of a nation, and his integrity was always with him. He taught it to his son Solomon, and Solomon over in Proverbs, the 20th chapter, and verse says, "A righteous man who walks in integrity, how blessed are his sons after him." And so when you talk about integrity, there's nothing probably more important than the thumbprint of integrity in our lives. When people look at our lives as Christians, as they oftentimes do, they're looking for people that are trustworthy. They're looking for people who are honest. They're looking for people who are genuine. They're looking for people who stand by their word, and when they say something, they do the very things that they say that they are going to do. Ted Engstrom, he gives a succinct definition of integrity. He simply says this: simply put, integrity is doing what you said you would do. And then he goes on to say, it means you keep your promises. When you promise to be faithful to your mate, integrity says you'll stay with that person no matter what, for better or for worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness or in health. If you promise the Lord that you would give him glory, integrity means you keep on doing that whether you're reduced to nothing or exalted to the highest position on earth. If you promise a friend that you're going to return their call, integrity means you will return the call. If you promise your child that you would spend Sunday or Saturday together, integrity means that you're going to keep that appointment. A promise is a holy thing, whether made to the chairman of the board or to a child. And when you look down through the scriptures, maybe say for in the Hall of Faith in Hebrews 11, or if you just think about Bible characters that we have enjoyed listening to and their stories, oftentimes their stories became something to us, and they become heroes of great faith because of their integrity. And there are several people who stand out in my mind when I think about integrity, and it's really a short list of the myriad of lists that it could be. For instance, if you were to talk about Joseph, who is, Dan Alligood's favorite guy in the Bible, next maybe only to Daniel, You'll see that Joseph was a person of integrity. Joseph, after being sold into slavery by his brothers, and given over to the Ishmaelites, and being purchased then by the Egyptian Potiphar and placed in his house, he rises to a great prominence in the house of Potiphar. But you remember that in Genesis, the 39th chapter and verse 6, it says that, speaking of Joseph, that he was handsome in form and an appearance as a young man. And Potiphar's wife takes notice of how nice looking this young man is, and it says that she continually is trying to seduce him. Joseph, being a young man and handsome, probably has all the urges that young men do, but Joseph refuses. In fact, as you look at 39 and verse 8, there it says, "But Joseph refused. Look," he told her, "my master trusts me with everything in his entire household. No one here has more authority than I do. He has held back nothing from me except you, because you are his wife. How could I do such a wicked thing? It would be a great sin against God." Why? Because of his integrity. And the thing that I noticed here is he didn't say that it would be a sin against you, Potiphar's wife. It would not be a sin against Potiphar himself. He said it would be a sin against God for me to do this. He was a man of integrity. As he grows on into adulthood and becomes second in power only to Pharaoh himself, his brothers come to him looking for help, not knowing that this powerful Egyptian is their brother that they sold into slavery. And yet, when you look at the integrity of Joseph, after being mistreated and brutalized by his brothers, Joseph had integrity in his heart to look at them with tears in his eyes and forgive them, saying that God meant this for good. That's integrity. Or Joshua, who is Moses' successor. Joshua, who's going to lead the children in the conquest of the Promised Land, are going to lead a people who are vacillating. One moment they're all in, the next moment they're not all in. And so Joshua, over in the 24th chapter, he says these words in verse 15. He says to them in a very decisive kind of way, he says, "Choose for yourselves this day whom you are going to serve. Are you going to serve the gods of your fathers on the other side of the river, or the gods of the Amalekites of which we now dwell, the land in which we now dwell? As for me and my house, we will serve the Lord." That's in integrity. He's outnumbered. He is the leader, taking on, big shoes in terms of Moses himself, and yet there's this integrity about this man who says, you need to choose. My family, we're going to choose to serve the Lord, whether you guys do or whether you don't. That's what we're going to do, and he's such a great leader. David, when he went before Saul, and he's hearing this giant Goliath outside taunting the armies of God, he asked Saul, he goes, "Who's this uncircumcised Philistine who taunts the armies of God?" He's a ruddy youth. He's just probably a teenager. And yet he's saying to Saul, "The king, what are you doing? How can we deal with this?" And we know that David then went out and he confronts a giant of a man that was a warrior from his youth, an experienced soldier, an experienced person when it comes down to battle. And of course, we know the end of that story, don't we? We know that he took that guy out by the power of God, but he was a young man of integrity. Elijah, when Jezebel and Ahab had killed the Lord's prophets, they set up altars to worship false god Baal. And Elijah, he confronts them on Mount Carmel. And we know the end of that story. We know that 450 prophets of Baal were slaughtered on that day. Elijah was a man of integrity. Paul and Silas in the Philippian jail are arrested, not because they did anything criminal or anything wrong. They simply preached the good news of Jesus and how God was superior to all other gods, and the people followed after them, causing a great riot of people. And the result is they are beaten and they are thrown in jail and they are put in stocks in a dark place, and yet they sing praises to God and offer up their prayers. They are men of integrity. Or Daniel. As a young man, Daniel was led into captivity to Babylon from Jerusalem, along with his 3 friends. And Daniel had integrity even as a youth, refusing to eat the food of the king Nebuchadnezzar and choosing to eat vegetables along. He refused to taint his life or to give up those things that God would have him to do. This young man had integrity even as a young person. As he becomes an old man, and Babylon is defeated by the Medes and the Persians, and Darius is placed as king as the Medes, he looked over the men that he might appoint to rule over his kingdom. And there it says that Daniel stood head and shoulders over everyone else. Daniel chapter 6, verses 1 through 3. It seemed good to Darius to appoint 120 satraps over the kingdom, that they should be in charge of the whole kingdom, and over them 3 commissioners, of whom Daniel was one, that these satraps might be accountable to them, and that the king might not suffer loss. Then this Daniel began distinguishing himself among the commissioners and satraps because he possessed an extraordinary spirit. And the king planned to appoint him over the entire kingdom. The result was that the satraps and the other commissioners, they tried to find some way that they could entrap him, some kind of accusation that they could make against him, but they couldn't even find a single thing to lay on the guy. Not at all. It's all because of his integrity. In fact, what was it that Darius saw in Daniel that was head and shoulders above everyone else? So he said that I might not lose loss, which means there's a lot of graft going on with those guys there. It would be his integrity. When you talk about integrity, I think there are 2, at least in my mind, there are 2 tests. The first one would be the adversity test. How are you doing when things are going well, as opposed when the bottom falls out, when maybe you're not doing so well, when maybe, economics are stressing you out, and maybe it's becoming much harder to make ends meet, when your best dreams become your worst nightmares and you're faced with adversity. Proverbs 24 and verse 10 says, if you faint or falter in the day of adversity or trouble or pressure, your strength, he says, is small. What he's saying, that even when we feel small, even when we feel like fainting, it's important that we hold to our integrity, that we always do what is right. The test of adversity simplifies life down to absolutes like food and clothing and shelter. Jesus even talked about that over in Matthew, the 6th chapter, beginning in verse 24 and going down. He talks about why are you anxious about what you're going to eat or what you're going to drink or the clothes that you're going to wear or what you're going to cover your head with in terms of shelter. Why are you worried about those things? The Gentiles worry about that, but you shouldn't. Adversity may come your way, but God's promise is that I'll take care of the absolutes in life. When you talk about success, though, then you're talking about something that is a much stiffer test. Adversity simplifies life. Prosperity complicates it. And when God reaches down and promotes a person to a place of prosperity, to a high position, like, say, Daniel, then integrity is the name of the game. And staying there is the name of the game. I mean, think about Daniel. God reaches down, he promotes Daniel to a high commissioner, and as soon as he's put there, his peers begin to look for cracks in his armor. They begin to look through his files, they begin to spy on him, to audit him. They're determined that they're going to find something about him. Verse 4 says this of Daniel 6. Then the commissioners and the satraps began trying to find a ground of accusation against Daniel in regard to governmental affairs, but they could find no ground of accusation or evidence of corruption, inasmuch as he was faithful and no negligence or corruption was to be found in him. That's integrity. And when they did nail him, they nailed him over his faith in God and his religious practice of praying to God on a regular basis. That's the worst they could find on the guy. But they couldn't find anything when they dug deep into his files about his life. There are a number of thoughts when you talk about integrity. True integrity implies that you are going to do right even when no one is looking. That you're going to do right when you have no audience, when you have no one looking over your shoulder, that you're going to do right even when no one else is doing right, even when everyone else is compromising. True integrity means that you're going to keep your promises even when no one else is going to keep theirs and no one else is going to check up on you and everyone else is lying. Real integrity is something that deals with adversity and prosperity. Jeremiah has an interesting passage of Scripture over in Jeremiah, the 12th chapter, and verse 5. Listen to what it says. If you have run with footmen and they have tired you out, then how can you compete with horses? If you fall down in the land of peace, how will you do in the thicket of the Jordan? You're saying, what is he talking about? If you fail when you're simply running the human life and you fall down in just the normal things of life, then he says, what are you going to do when you find yourself running with the horses that are fast compared to what humans are? How are you going to do when you run into that kind of situation? What are you going to do when you find yourself down in the thicket of the Jordan, where it's not easy to move, where it's harder to move? And guess what lives in the thicket? Lions do. So what he's saying, he goes, if you're finding it hard to live life right now, when everything is okay, what are you going to do when life gets challenging? When adversity comes your way, when difficulty comes your way, when you're going to be put to the test, where will your integrity be in that time? To me, it's so disheartening to look around at society and see what's going on. The people that you thought you could trust and that you can count on, only to find out that they lack integrity. I'm talking about ministers. I'm talking about politicians, newscasters who carry us the news, sports stars who succumb to power and wealth and sexual indiscretions, whose integrity was challenged and end up being completely destroyed. They destroy their character, their career. They're damaged severely because maybe a lapse in judgment, maybe not thinking it all the way through. And even if they fall and rise again, they never rise to that position again. Okay, so what am I saying to you? I'm saying to you that your integrity is so important that if you ever lose it, it's hard to regain it again. I'm not saying you can't, but it becomes extremely difficult to get back where you once were. When I thought about this, I thought about Bill O'Reilly, the O'Reilly factor, the no-spin zone. This guy was the most watched news anchor of all time, eclipsing any of the competition, way, way beyond any of the competition on any other news channels. For Fox News, he was this newscaster, but he got caught. He got caught up to some degree in the Me Too movement, but only because of his questionable indiscretions with women. They accused him of harassment with women, and the result was they canned him. They fired him. Who could have thought that you could touch Bill O'Reilly? But they fired him. And I'm not saying that he deserved it or didn't deserve it. That's not my point. I'm just saying that he made some bad choices, he made some bad moves, and he damaged his career. And he damaged his character. And now Bill O'Reilly's back. He's on the First. He's on the OT channel, O, capital T, capital T. And he's got what is called the No Spin News. And I've watched him a number of times. And he's still really good at speaking. He's still articulate. He's still everything that he was on Fox News, but he has a viewership about this big. So he was once up here, and because of his character, his integrity was hurt, and now he's down here, and he's trying to climb his way back up, and he's going to find it really hard to do that. He's a shadow, in other words, of what he once used to be in terms of popularity and listenership. Happens to politicians. Most recent, Matt Gaetz, Republican senator from Florida, an up-and-coming rising star on that political side of the aisle, a lion and an extremely articulate young man. But he decided that he was going to have girls flown in to D.C., and he's going to put them up in hotels. Not on your dime, he said, it's on my dime, but he hurt his character. And whether it's fair or not, whether it was, he said it's a political hit job or not, he did it to himself because of his character. It's been called into question. And now even those on his side of the aisle, on the GOP, are asking for his resignation. The guy is going to have a hard time coming back and surviving if he in fact is able to do so. Or what about the governor of New York, Andrew Cuomo, and his stuff? Guys, we're talking about guys that we're supposed to trust, that we're to put our, that we just think they're going to be there for us. And that's not only true of politicians and newscasters, and that's true of ministers as well. True of ministers as well. And it's true of Christians. Old Christians and young Christians. Your integrity is everything. And if you damage it, it's going to be hard. And I'm not saying you can't be forgiven by God, because you can. Some say, well, David is the exception to that rule. Are you sure about that? Have you studied into the life of David? David, up until his indiscretion with Bathsheba, that guy never lost a battle. Never lost a battle. After his discretion, and he goes to Nathan, and Nathan says, you're the man. And Nathan says, go to God and ask him to forgive me. Nathan comes back to him and says, David, your sins are forgiven, but the sword will never leave your house. After that, he lost battles. And after that, his daughter Tamar was raped by her brother Amnon. And Amnon was killed by his half-brother Absalom. And Absalom's tried to steal the kingdom away from David. David was never where he once was before that indiscretion, because his integrity and his character was hurt. Or I could talk to you about Solomon. Solomon had some of the greatest wisdom in all the scriptures, but it says that his love for the women that he married, that they took his heart or tore his heart away from God, and there's no indication that he ever came back from that. So all I'm saying to you is this: as Christians, that we just have to watch our integrity. And if you are wondering about this lesson, that you just need to know that while I'm saying this to you, it's 100-fold back at me. Because I know that a lot of eyes are on me. And so your integrity is so important. So it's no wonder that Solomon wrote, guard your heart with all diligence. Other translation says, watch your heart with all diligence, for from it flow the springs of life. And it can be sweet or it can be bitter. So watch your hearts. God give us men, and when I say men, you can say women or teenagers. God give us men. A time like this demands strong minds, great hearts, true faith, and ready hands. Men whom the lust of office does not kill. Men whom the spoils of office cannot buy. Men who possess opinions and will. Men who have honor. Men who will not lie. Men who can stand before a demagogue. Tall men, sun-crowned, who have lived above the fog of public duty in their private thinking. For while the rabble, with their thumb-warmed creeds, their large professions, and their little deeds mingle in the selfish strife, lo, freedom weeps, wrong rules, and the land and waiting justice sleeps. We need men of integrity, women of integrity, teenagers of integrity. And so the lesson really has been one about reflecting on integrity. I know that I've talked about integrity in the past. Dr. Evan O'Neill Kane is a pioneer of the medical profession. He was chief surgeon at New York's Kane Summit Hospital. During his 37 years of experience, Dr. Kane had seen so many deaths occur because of general anesthesia, and he thought there had to be a better way to address it. And so he studied about it, and his opinion was very strong that the major operations could and should be done under safer local anesthesia. His only problem was that he was finding it hard to find someone who was willing to do that. To test his theories out. He couldn't find volunteers until one day someone finally stepped forward to put his theory to the test. In 37 years, Dr. Evan Kane had conducted over 4,000 appendectomies. 4,000 appendectomies. All, he said, were fairly routine, but this one would be different. The patient would remain awake throughout the entire operation. So as they wheeled the patient into the operation, they prepped him. They eventually gave him a localized anesthesia, and then Dr. Kane went to work. He took the knife out and he cut through the surface tissues, clamping off the blood vessels en route to the appendix. Locating the appendix, he pulled it up, and then he performs the surgery. The operation was concluded and it was successfully done. The patient did fairly well with some discomfort, but not a lot of discomfort. In fact, the patient's recovery was so remarkable that he was dismissed within 2 days of the operation. Dr. Kane's test was a brilliant success. The risk of general anesthesia was put to rest, and the local anesthesia can work on these kinds of cases. This milestone surgery took place on February the 15th, 1921. And you might want to note the final interesting fact. Dr. Evan O'Neill Kane and the patient who volunteered for this experimental procedure had a great deal in common. They were both the same man. And now you know the rest of the story. That's from Paul Harvey. I found that interesting. You say, why are you bringing this up when you talk about integrity? Well, I'm bringing it up because there's times when we need to pause and do some surgery on ourselves. And to look at our own, well, not our own appendix, but on our own hearts. And ask ourselves, how's our character? How's my integrity? Am I a person that means what I say, will do what I say, that I'll be trustworthy and honest and above board? So let me encourage you this next week, and forever, to be people of integrity. God loves those kinds of people. And I know you're all capable of it. You say, oh, but I've already messed up so much. That's okay. We've all messed up. And as Shelby so succinctly shared with us in the Lord's Supper, well, that's why Jesus died. So that we could be forgiven of our sins. What an incredible God we serve. You know David, I kind of left you with a bad taste maybe about David. Did you know that David, even at the end of his life, was known as a man after God's own heart? Maybe he struggled with other humans, but he didn't struggle with God. He's okay with God. And you will be as well. Well, together we stand and sing. If you need to respond, won't you do so at this time?